huge amount of voice. So just pray that the voice lasts and that I don't cough. I haven't been skiving in the last few weeks where you haven't seen me. I really haven't been terribly well at all, so getting there. Anyway, I'm going to start by recapping a bit on what I did last time, partly because some of you weren't able to come and it didn't go out on the website for various reasons. And I thought it would be good just to cover it again a little bit. If you remember, when I spoke last time, it was the Jewish festival of Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, when we remember the giving of the law. We read the passage about the law, and Ruth blew her shofar very loudly. She's gone out now, but, and that was good. Because at the end of chapter 10, the end of chapter 9, beginning of chapter 10, Paul talks about the stumbling stone, and he quotes Isaiah that God has laid in Zion a stumbling stone. And the stumbling stone is the law, because the Jewish people have tried and tried over the centuries to keep it, but they've never really been able to, because it's too difficult. And so they've made more laws to cover around like a fence around the original law, to try and not break the original law. But they can't keep that either. So the law had become a stumbling block to the Israelites. But at the beginning of chapter 10, it says that Jesus... Sorry? Yes. Oh, sorry. Yes, Romans. Sorry, I didn't mention. Okay, Romans chapter 10. It says that Jesus fulfilled the law and the prophets. Well, that means he fulfilled the Mosaic law, the law that was given to Moses, and he fulfilled the prophecies concerning himself as the Messiah. Now, there are over 300 of those prophecies concerning the Messiah, and people have worked out that it would be impossible for anybody to actually choose to fulfill those laws. It had to be from God. I read one place that if you covered the whole of the state of Texas, which is enormous, with tiny coins to the depth of about 6, and there was one marked one randomly in amongst all those, and somebody dropped by parachute to pick up that one coin. The numbers against it are absolutely billions to 1 that you could actually do that, and that's the same as the fulfilling of the Messiah prophecies. But Jesus fulfilled every single one, apart from the ones to do with the coming again, because that hasn't happened yet, but he will. Now this verse has been used, and others like it, to give 2 different theologies. One of them started back in the 1st century, which was replacement theology, that says that the church has totally replaced Israel in God's plans. The Bible doesn't say that. We shall come to that in a minute. The other one is a bit newer, and we call it fulfillment theology, which says that Jesus has fulfilled everything. All the prophecies, all the law, everything. That's not true either. Jesus fulfilled the prophecies concerning himself as Messiah. He didn't fulfill the covenant promises concerning the land of Israel. They were given to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, to Moses, to Joshua, to David. They continued down the ages and they still stand today, because they were given for 1,000 generations. Now, if a generation is roughly 30 to 40 years, which is what we believe it is, that's 30 to 40,000 years. And we've only had 4,000 since Abraham, so we're nowhere near the end of those particular prophecies. But fulfillment theology says there's nothing more to be done. We can forget about everything else. It's all done. Not true. Jesus said, until. Revelation says, until. There are about 4 quite strong untils that have not happened yet, and they're in the Bible. So fulfillment theology and replacement theology are both wrong. So now we come to Romans chapter 11. Some people find this the most difficult chapter in the Bible. I can't even find the beginning of it. Here we are. So Paul says, and each of these chapters that we've looked at, 9, 10 and 11, he starts off with a very strong pronouncement about how he feels. So I ask then, has God totally rejected and disowned his people? Of course not. Now mine says of course not. I think the NIV says something by no means or something like that. The old King James Version, which is the one I like best on this, says, God forbid. Has God rejected his people? No, God forbid. And Paul goes on to say, I'm a Jew myself. I'm a descendant of Abraham, of the tribe of Benjamin. So God hadn't rejected Paul. He didn't believe in Jesus when he was on earth, but he was confronted by Jesus not long after, and then he believed. He was a Jew who came to believe later, and so did many. No, God has not rejected and disowned his people. His destiny is marked out from the beginning. And then he talks about Elijah, and how Elijah thought he was the only one left of the prophets. But he wasn't. God said, no, there are 7,000. They're not all killed. Poor old Elijah, I alone am left, and they seek me too. But no, there were 7,000. There's always a remnant. We heard that in the first message I gave, always a remnant. And of course there's always been a remnant of Jewish people who have believed that Jesus is the Messiah. And they've spoken about it and they've declared it down the ages. Paul was one of the first, obviously, with the other disciples and apostles and some of the women. But there are still people who don't believe. So why do the Jewish people not believe? Why have they not believed over the years? Well, that's where we come to this next bit. God gave them a spirit of stupor, or of not understanding. He blinded their eyes. It says they have eyes, but they can't see. They have ears, but they can't hear. It's really, in a way, not their fault, because God has put that on them for the time, in order that many Gentiles might come to believe. But you know, it's not just the Jews who have sometimes a blindness and a lack of understanding. There are things that can blind us too. Things that we may have done or been involved in the past. They maybe they don't prevent us from actually being Christians, but they can cut that clear vision of the Lord and of what he's saying in his word. So what am I talking about? Well, anything occult. If you've ever been involved in anything, that includes what we consider to be relatively harmless things, like horoscopes, maybe tarot cards, Ouija boards, anything of the occult. be cutting off from if it's been there in your past, because it can cloud your vision. Yoga is another one that a lot of people think is fine, it's just exercises. No, it's not. It comes from a Hindu background, it has Hindu roots, and it's very anti-Christian. If you've ever been involved in yoga, or you know people who are, pray for them, because it's not right, and it will affect the way they view Christianity and the Bible. The other one that occurred to me, and there may be more that occur to you, is Freemasonry. And I'm going to give a personal testimony here. My father was a Freemason. He joined a lodge sometime back around the wartime, mainly because he had two brothers who had joined the same lodge. They lived in Coventry, which is where he comes from, and he lived down here. And they came down to London 2 or 3 times a year, and it was a time when they met up together. But it's not right. And when I became a really committed, born-again Christian as a teenager, I found his little book that he used to take to meetings. And I read it, and I was absolutely appalled. And I thought, what is my father into? I thought it was just dreadful. But you know, when I tried to talk to him about it, or talk to him about the Lord, and I did at that time and later, it was just as if a glass screen had fallen down between him and me. He was there, I was here, I was talking, and my words were just bouncing back at me. He couldn't hear, he couldn't see. So if you've had Freemasonry in your family, I don't believe anybody here has probably actually been a Freemason, but if it's there in the family, you need to be cut off from it, as I had to be, because it will cloud you. Our roots as Christians can never be in any of these things. Paul talks about roots in, verse 16. He says the first fruits, the things that were offered to Abraham, were consecrated and holy. And so the whole mass, the whole nation of Israel is holy. And if the root is consecrated, so are the branches. So the root of Israel was consecrated. The branches are consecrated. If the roots are not consecrated, if the roots are evil, then the branches won't be right either. And we need to remember that. You know, there are other people who look to other things in Christianity for their roots. I had to go to a meeting a long time ago now, which was run by a group called Northern Lights. I didn't particularly want to go, but I had to. They started off with some songs that were vaguely about God. They certainly weren't about Jesus. And then when the man got up to speak, he said, "Oh, well, I've read the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. We're not involved with any of that this morning." And talked about St. Cuthbert and St. Aidan and various people. Afterwards, I was asked what I thought. I was hoping not to have to say anything, because I felt completely... Do you know what I mean by jangly? When something's going wrong and you just feel, "Oh, I don't like this." I felt jangly all through that meeting. And I didn't want to answer the question, but I had to. And I said, well, they didn't mention Jesus once, the whole service, from beginning to end. Didn't even mention God much. It was all about these things. So my questioner then said, "But don't you want to know about the roots of your Christianity?" Well, at that point, I'm afraid I very nearly exploded. And I said, "That is not our roots, that's Celtic Christianity, it's history. It's got its good bits and its bad bits, like other history has. Our roots are Jewish. They're in Judaism. They are not in Celtic Christianity." Got to have good roots. And how do we have good into the right tree. And in this case, it's the olive tree. And Paul talks a lot about the olive tree here. I did a study on olive trees once, and it's really quite an interesting one. They're great trees. They're almost impossible to kill. If you want to kill it, you've really got to dig up the whole of the roots, because the roots will always shoot up again. The ones in the Garden of Gethsemane on the Mount of Olives, some of them possibly were there when Jesus was there. They can be that old. And we need as Christians to be grafted into the olive tree. So how do we do that? Well, basically God has to do it for us. But if you know anything about horticulture and grafting, you have the stock tree. In this case it would be an olive, but probably most of us are more familiar with maybe roses or fruit trees. You have to cut a big slice right into the bark and the sap wood of the tree. And then you have your graft that's going to go in, your new rose or your new apple tree or whatever it is, has to be sliced off at an angle to fit into that graft on the tree, so that it's going to get the sap coming up to actually make it grow and make it stay where it is. You bind it round afterwards to hold it there, and eventually that graft will take and become a part of the original tree. And these days they do really clever stuff. You have one stock apple and you can graft on an apple, a pear, a plum, or anything else, and have 3 lots of fruit on one tree. I haven't actually tried it, but that's what they say. So we need as Christians to be truly grafted into the Jewish olive tree. That means knowing the Old Testament, the law, the prophets, the Psalms, the writings, being really imbued with what? It's the sap, it's what rises from the roots of Judaism to feed us as the grafted in branches. And Paul's very clear that Jewish branches have been broken off because they didn't believe and they've walked away from God. And it's given us the chance to be grafted in. But you know, if we boast over the Jews, and churches have done that, if we boast over the Jews, then we can be cut off. He said it's easier for a wild olive to be cut off than it is for the native olives. I think the church in this country, a lot of it, is in danger because a lot of them do not want to have much to do with the Jews. They don't like some of the things that Israel is doing. That's a political matter. But Israel is God's chosen nation. And if the church turns against Israel, then it's not just bad for the church. I believe it's bad for the country. I think this country is in a pretty poor state at the moment. The headline in last week's Jewish Chronicle was "Hate takes centre stage in Britain." Obviously it was referring to what happened at Glastonbury, and I think about 6 pages covered that in there. Hate takes centre stage in Britain. That's terrible. And it's Jew hate. It's not just hate, any old hate. It's hatred of the Jews. Apparently the term anti-Semitism was coined in the 19th century because up until then it had always just been known as Jew hatred or Jew hate. And people didn't like it. They thought it was a bit of a nasty way of talking about it. So somebody coined the phrase anti-Semitism because it sounded a bit nicer. Well, it's not a bit nicer. It's just the same. It's just as horrible. And I hate it that my Jewish friends have this coming at them all the time. And I have some good Jewish friends. They're not believers in Jesus yet, but hopefully one day they will be. But it's horrible that they have to live with this. And this country is in a bad state. And I think the church has a lot to answer for, because they've turned against them. They've gone down the woke route of all sorts of things. They've tried to be all things to all people. And the world has taken over the church. Is it because of that we've now got a government that is perilously close to abandoning Israel? I don't know. That's what I wrote down when I was thinking about this. We have a Prime Minister who says one thing one day, something else the other. We have a Foreign Secretary who knows nothing about the Middle East at all. And anyway, he seems to have disappeared. What's happened to him? I haven't seen him lately. We have a Foreign Office that has never been pro-Israel. They've always been anti. They've always taken the Arab view. But you know, the Arabs are not as anti-Israel as everybody thinks they are. Yes, Hamas and people like that are, and Iran, but the Iranians are not Arabs anyway. But the Arab nations, I don't know if you noticed, but when Israel attacked Iran and destroyed a lot of their nuclear, none of the Arab nations said anything against it. Why? Because they're all just as scared of Iran as Israel, and they're quite happy for Israel to do their work for them and try and get rid of it. Our nation is in peril. I've asked Hilary if she will read from Matthew 25, the parable of the sheep and the goats. When I was a youngster, we were taught that this was just how we should behave to other people. That's okay, but that's not the whole meaning of it. And I want Hilary to read this now. It'd also give me a chance to have a drink.
So it's Matthew 25, starting from verse 31. The sheep and the goat nations. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people, one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you?" The king will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." Then he will say to those on his left, "Depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not look after me." They also will answer, "Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty, or a stranger, or needing clothes, or sick or in prison, and did not help you?" He will reply, "Truly I tell you, Whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me. Then they will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life.
Thank you. That parable is about the nations. It's not really about individuals. And Jesus is saying there that it's how we treat his brethren. Jesus was a Jew. On earth, he was a Jew. He's still a Jew. His titles are still Lion of Judah. Things like that. Jewish titles. And this is how the nations treat the Jews. Our nation has a patchy history concerning Israel. Some good and some not so good. And I think it's getting worse. If it hadn't been for Britain, maybe the state of Israel would not have actually been reformed. We had the mandate for that area called Palestine at the time, and the Balfour Declaration of 1917 promised a homeland for the Jews. That was ratified in 1920 by the League of Nations at the San Remo Conference. And the State of Israel actually came into being in 1948, after a vote in 1947 by the United Nations, which granted them that land. Britain facilitated all that up to that point. But when it came to the Jews actually coming back to the land, Jews who'd been in the camps, where 6 million of them were killed in the gas chambers, the ones that survived, trying to get back to the land. The British Army turned them away from the beaches. They sent them to Cyprus to start with, and then some of them were sent back to the camps that they'd come from. Absolutely heartrending. I was in Yad Vashem at one time, the big Holocaust museum in Israel, and inside some of the buildings they showed little films, and I saw a film of that, and there were a whole lot of Israeli school children in there learning the history. We were standing at the back, and I knew I was actually going to either burst out with awful crying, or I was going to start laughing. You know how you can sometimes when your emotions are just completely raw? I went out. I thought, whatever I do, I can't do it in front of these children. But it was because it was the British turning all these poor people away. But of course, eventually, enough of them did come back. Churchill said he wiped his hands of the whole thing and promptly lost the next general election. Surprise. Since the State of Israel has been in being, on the whole, we've supported them. We've sold them what they've needed, and we've bought a lot of stuff from them. In fact, if you're under any sort of medical help at all, you've probably got Israeli stuff around you, because an awful lot of it comes from Israel. Or it was created in Israel, even if it's not bought from them. But the country is turning further and further away from Israel. And this, I'm afraid, I don't normally talk politics, but this government, I think, is in danger of abandoning them. We need to pray for this nation far more than we probably do. We meet for prayer for Israel on a Monday afternoon. We often pray for England, Britain as well. At the moment, she's not here. Dorothy said she was coming, but she's not here. It's very often just Dorothy and me and Andrew Birkinshaw-Smith, who goes to St Mary's now. Andrew's a trustee of Christian Friends of Israel, and they have their meetings on Mondays about once a month. So sometimes it's just Dorothy and me. We would love a few more. If any of you are free on Monday afternoon and would like to come and pray, not just for Israel, but for our country and our attitude to Israel as well, we would be very happy to have you. There's one more verse I wanted to share with you about how we behave towards Israel, and it's in Isaiah chapter 60. It's the chapter that starts off speaking to Jerusalem. Arise and shine with the glory of the Lord, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord is upon you. And it goes on to talk about Jerusalem in the last days and how wonderful it's going to be. And in verse 11 it says, your gates will be open continually, they'll not be shut day or night, that men may bring to you the wealth of nations, and their kings led in procession. But the nation and kingdom that will not serve you in that day shall perish. Yes, those nations will be utterly laid waste. It's a hard one, isn't it? Do we want our nation to be laid waste? If we don't, we need to do something about it. We need more prayer. Are we going to be sheep, or are we going to be goats? Eventually, in chapter 11 of Romans, Paul says in verse 26, all Israel will be saved. So we can look to that day when we as the grafted in ones will be joined with them, and they are saved. I'm going to stop there. It's not the end of the chapter. I'm speaking again at the beginning of August, and we will complete Romans 11 and maybe look at a bit of Romans 12 as well. But that's it for today. But I would just like to remind you of one thing that I felt the Lord said to me last time about praying for the Jewish people. Pray that they think the unthinkable and that they search the unsearchable. They've been told not to think about Jesus. They've been told not to search the scriptures. Pray that they do, that they think and they search. They don't need the preacher these days. They can go online. You can find things almost anywhere, as I'm sure you know. I mean, sometimes when I'm looking up Israeli dances that I want to remind myself of, down the side on YouTube, come up all sorts of things. Really good messianic teaching. Now there are plenty of Israelis and Jewish people elsewhere who do Israeli dancing. They look up stuff on there. Pray that they click on one of these things down the side that will be good and will teach them. Think the unthinkable, search the unsearchable. Might be true for a lot of Gentiles too.